Welcome to Shadow Frames, where we uncover the stories that lie hidden within the forgotten images of the past. I'm your host, and today we're examining a photograph that has captivated my attention for weeks. An innocent Christmas celebration from 1894 that, at first glance, appears to be nothing more than a charming holiday memory. But as with many images that find their way to our channel, there's something lurking beneath the surface. Something in the mirror behind the Christmas tree that changes everything about this seemingly joyful scene. Before we begin, make sure you're settled in. This story takes us deep into the heart of Victorian London, where gas lamps cast long shadows and the line between the living and the departed was often blurred by those seeking comfort from the other side. The photograph came to my attention through an antique dealer in Norwich who specializes in Victorian memorabilia. The dealer acquired it among the contents of an old writing desk purchased at an estate auction. The desk had belonged to the Blackwood family, a once prominent name in London society whose lineage had finally come to an end with the passing of the last heir, a reclusive bachelor who died without children or close relations. The photograph itself is a sepia-toned silver gelatin print, approximately 6 by 8 inches, mounted on cardboard as was typical of the period. It shows a well-appointed Victorian parlor decorated for Christmas. A tall pine tree stands in the corner, adorned with candles, glass ornaments, and strands of beads. Presents wrapped in plain paper and tied with twine are arranged beneath it. The room speaks of wealth. Heavy velvet curtains frame the windows, ornate furniture fills the space, and a grand piano stands against one wall. In the 1890s, Christmas celebrations among the British upper classes had evolved into elaborate affairs. Prince Albert had popularized the German tradition of decorating Christmas trees decades earlier, and by 1894, no proper English home would be without one during the holiday season. The Blackwood's tree followed the fashion of the time. Real candles carefully clipped to branches, delicate glass ornaments imported from Germany, and strings of cranberries and popcorn meticulously threaded by servants in the days leading up to Christmas. The candles would be lit only briefly on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, with footmen standing by with buckets of water in case of fire, a common hazard of Victorian Christmas celebrations. Gathered around the tree is the Blackwood family. James Blackwood, a distinguished gentleman with a full beard and the proud posture of a successful businessman. His wife Eleanor, fair-haired and delicate in appearance, wearing a high-necked dress with lace detailing. Their 3 children. William, the eldest son, about 16, already showing his father's strong jawline. Catherine, perhaps 13, her hair in perfect ringlets, and little Margaret, no more than 7, clutching a new porcelain doll. James Blackwood was not born to wealth, but had built his shipping empire through astute business decisions and strategic marriages. His first wife, whom he married in his 20s, died of tuberculosis after just 2 years of marriage. He remained a widower for nearly a decade, focusing on expanding his business interests before meeting Eleanor Harrington at a society ball in 1877. Eleanor was the daughter of a baronet, bringing social connections that complemented James's financial resources. Their marriage was considered advantageous by both families. Eleanor had been raised in the protective cocoon of aristocratic privilege, educated by governesses in the gentle arts appropriate for a lady of her standing, watercolor painting, piano, French, and proper etiquette. She was ill-prepared for the harsh realities that would later confront her. Her sheltered upbringing may explain why, when faced with inexplicable phenomena, she had few psychological defenses beyond the rigid social structures and religious beliefs of her time. They're all smiling, which was somewhat unusual for photographs of this period, given the long exposure times that made holding expressions difficult. But this was Christmas after all, a time of joy and celebration, especially for a family of their standing. Behind them, above the mantelpiece, hangs a large ornate mirror in an elaborate gilt frame, and it's here, in this mirror's reflection, that our story truly begins. Upon first viewing the photograph, most people notice nothing unusual. The mirror simply reflects the back of the family and more of the room. But when the image is enlarged and enhanced, something becomes visible in that reflection that isn't present in the room itself. A figure, standing just behind the family, partly obscured by the Christmas tree. The figure appears to be a woman in dark clothing. Her face is indistinct due to the limitations of the photographic technology of the time and the fact that she's captured only in reflection. But she is unquestionably there, and unquestionably absent from the actual room. This anomaly led me to investigate the Blackwood family history. piecing together the events surrounding this Christmas of 1894 through letters, diaries, newspaper articles, and public records. What emerged was a tale far more disturbing than a mere photographic curiosity. James Blackwood had made his fortune in shipping, establishing lucrative trade routes with the colonies. By 1894, he was a respected member of London society, known for his business acumen and generous charitable contributions. Eleanor, his wife of 17 years, was praised for her grace and skill as a hostess. Their children were well educated and, by all accounts, the family embodied Victorian ideals of propriety and success. But beneath this perfect facade lay a web of secrets that began to unravel in the autumn of 1894.
According to household accounts and correspondence I uncovered, the Blackwoods hired a new lady's maid for Eleanor in September of that year. Her name was Charlotte Wells, a young woman of 23 who came with excellent references from another prominent family. Charlotte was described as quiet but efficient, with a gentle manner that endeared her particularly to young Margaret. Charlotte's arrival coincided with a noticeable change in Eleanor's demeanor, documented in her personal diary.
Eleanor began to suffer from headaches and insomnia. She wrote of strange noises in the house at night, footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing of their own accord, and occasionally the sound of a woman weeping. Her husband dismissed these complaints as feminine hysteria, a common diagnosis in that era for any woman showing signs of emotional distress or unusual behavior. He suggested she consult Dr. Harrison, the family physician, who prescribed valerian root and advised her to avoid excitable literature, particularly the Gothic novels that were popular at the time. But Eleanor's condition only worsened. By November, she had become pale and withdrawn. Her diary entries grew increasingly disjointed, filled with references to being watched and followed throughout the house. She wrote of catching glimpses of a shadow at the corner of her vision that would vanish when she turned to look directly at it. Most disturbing were her descriptions of the hallway mirror, the same one visible in the Christmas photograph. She claimed that when passing it, she sometimes saw a different reflection than her own, that of a woman with sorrowful eyes and a knowing smile. Initially, she attributed these visions to her deteriorating health, but as they persisted, she became convinced that something supernatural was occurring. James Blackwood's business correspondence from this period reveals his growing concern for his wife's mental state, though he continued to believe it was merely a nervous condition. He wrote to a colleague about postponing a business trip to Liverpool, explaining that Eleanor's fancies have made her quite impossible to reason with. He mentioned that she had become suspicious of the new maid, Charlotte, claiming the girl was somehow connected to these disturbances. It's worth noting that interest in spiritualism and the occult was at its height during the Victorian era. The bereaved often sought comfort through seances and mediums who claimed to communicate with the dead. While there's no evidence that Eleanor had previously shown interest in such practices, her diaries indicate she began to research them in November 1894, perhaps seeking an explanation for her experiences. On December 1st, she visited Madame Rostova, a medium operating in London at the time. According to Eleanor's diary, Madame Rostova became visibly distressed during their session, refusing to continue and returning Eleanor's payment. Her only explanation was that a dark presence had attached itself to Eleanor, and that she should beware of reflective surfaces, for they are doorways. Madame Rostova was one of the most respected mediums in London during this period, which made her reaction all the more significant. Born Ekaterina Rostova in St. Petersburg, she had fled Russia after claiming to have foreseen the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. She established herself in London's spiritualist circles in the 1880s, counting among her clients several members of the aristocracy, and even, it was rumored, a member of the royal family. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she was never exposed as a fraud, and she had a reputation for refusing clients when she sensed genuine danger. The building where Madame Rostova conducted her seances still stands in Bloomsbury, now converted into luxury flats. Current residents report no unusual occurrences, though the property developer noted that during renovation, workers discovered a hidden room behind a false wall, containing only a chair facing a large mirror. The mirror was reportedly removed and destroyed after one worker claimed to have seen someone else's face reflected in it. Following this unsettling encounter, Eleanor's paranoia intensified. She covered all the mirrors in the house with cloths, much to her husband's annoyance. She insisted on having a lamp burning in her bedroom throughout the night and requested that Charlotte sleep in an adjoining room rather than the servants' quarters, claiming she felt safer with the young woman nearby. Interestingly, the household accounts show that during this period, Charlotte received several increases in her wages. This was unusual for domestic staff, whose salaries typically remained fixed for the duration of their service. One might speculate that these were incentives to keep the maid from leaving as Eleanor's behavior became more erratic. As Christmas approached, James Blackwood was determined to maintain an appearance of normalcy. The family's social standing demanded that they host their annual Christmas Eve dinner and participate in the expected seasonal festivities. According to correspondence with relatives, he insisted that Eleanor remove the coverings from the mirrors and present herself as the perfect hostess their position required. Eleanor's diary entry from December 23rd reveals her dread. James will not listen to reason. He cares only for appearances. The mirrors must be uncovered, he says. More people will talk. If only he could see what I see. If only he knew what waits on the other side of the glass. The Christmas Eve dinner apparently proceeded without incident. Newspaper society pages reported that Mrs. Blackwood was in fine spirits, though looking somewhat delicate in health. Guests described an evening of excellent food, music, and conversation, with no hint of the disturbances that had plagued the household. The family photograph at the center of our investigation was taken the following day, Christmas Day, 1894. It was customary for wealthy families to document such occasions, and the Blackwoods had hired a professional photographer, Mr. Arthur Sullivan, to capture their Christmas celebration. Sullivan was known for his technical expertise and modern equipment, which allowed for faster exposure times than were previously possible. This advancement permitted the more natural expressions we see in the photograph, rather than the stiff poses common in earlier photography. According to Sullivan's appointment book, preserved in the archives of the Royal Photographic Society, he arrived at the Blackwood home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He set up his equipment in the parlor while the family opened gifts and enjoyed a light luncheon. The actual photograph was taken at approximately 3:30, after which Sullivan packed his equipment and departed, promising to deliver the finished prints within a fortnight. Arthur Sullivan was one of London's premier portrait photographers, having established his reputation with a series of striking images of stage actresses that captured both their beauty and theatrical presence. His innovative techniques had reduced exposure times to mere seconds rather than the minutes required by earlier processes, allowing for more natural expressions. His studio in Mayfair attracted the elite of London society, and his services commanded premium fees that only families like the Blackwoods could afford. Sullivan's equipment would have been state-of-the-art for 1894. He used a large format camera with a brass-bound mahogany body mounted on a substantial tripod. The lens, imported from Germany, was among the finest available, allowing for the sharp detail evident in the Blackwood photograph. He would have used magnesium flash powder to supplement the natural light from the windows, a brief, brilliant burst of light produced by igniting the powder in a flash pan. This technology was relatively new and not without risks. Numerous studio fires had been attributed to flash powder accidents. The photographic process itself was complex. After exposing the glass plate negative, Sullivan would have carefully packed it for transport back to his darkroom. There, under red safe light, he would develop the negative in a solution of pyrogallic acid, fix it with sodium thiosulfate, known then as hypo, wash it thoroughly, and allow it to dry. Only then could prints be made, a process involving sensitized paper exposed to sunlight through the negative and then processed through similar chemical baths. Understanding this technical context makes the anomaly in the Blackwood photograph all the more puzzling. Photographic manipulation was possible in 1894. Double exposures, composite printing, and even crude retouching were known techniques, but they required deliberate intervention at specific points in the process. The figure in the mirror would have needed to be added either during the initial exposure, which would have been visible to those present, or during the printing process, which would have required Sullivan to alter his own work for no apparent reason. What happened after the photographer left is pieced together from multiple sources: servants' testimonies, police reports, and the diary of Dr. Harrison, who was summoned to the house later that evening. Around 6 o'clock, as the family was preparing for Christmas dinner, a scream was heard from Eleanor's dressing room. Charlotte, the lady's maid, rushed to investigate and found her mistress in a state of extreme distress, pointing at her dressing table mirror and speaking incoherently. According to Charlotte's statement to the police, Eleanor kept repeating, "She's coming through. She's found a way." James was called upstairs and, finding his wife hysterical, sent for Dr. Harrison. Before the doctor arrived, Eleanor apparently calmed somewhat, though she refused to be left alone. She joined the family for dinner, where servants reported she ate little and kept glancing nervously at the mirror in the dining room. After dinner, the family retired to the parlor, the same room where the photograph had been taken earlier. Young Margaret wanted to play with her new doll. William was examining a mechanical train set he had received as a gift, and Catherine was reading a book of poetry. James attempted to maintain an atmosphere of normalcy, playing carols on the piano while Charlotte sat with Eleanor, who had taken a sedative prescribed by Dr. Harrison during his earlier visit. At approximately 9 o'clock, according to the butler's testimony, the gas lights in the parlor flickered and momentarily went out. When they came back on seconds later, Eleanor was standing before the mirror above the mantelpiece, her hand outstretched as if reaching for something, or someone, within it. The butler, Henry Simmons, had been with the Blackwood household for over a decade. A dignified man in his 50s, he was known for his unflappable demeanor and absolute discretion. His detailed testimony to the police is particularly valuable because of his reputation for careful observation and factual accuracy. Simmons had been educated at grammar school before entering service, and his written account of the events displays a vocabulary and clarity unusual for domestic staff of the period. "I was attending to the fire in the parlor grate," he wrote, "when without warning, all gas lamps dimmed to near darkness. Master William called out in surprise, and young Miss Margaret gave a small cry. The darkness persisted for perhaps 3 seconds, no more, and when illumination returned, I observed Madam had risen from her chair and was standing before the mantelpiece mirror. Her posture was most unusual, with her right arm extended toward the glass as if she were attempting to touch something within it. Her expression, I hesitate to describe it, for it was unlike any I had seen upon her countenance in my years of service. There was recognition there, and something akin to fear, yet also a strange welcome. What happened next varies slightly in different accounts, but all agree on the essential details. Eleanor suddenly turned to her family and spoke in a voice that, according to multiple witnesses, sounded hollow and unlike her own. She reportedly said, "She has been waiting. She has been watching. And now she is here." James moved to assist his wife, believing she was having another episode of hysteria. But before he reached her, every mirror in the room, the one above the mantelpiece, a smaller one on the wall, and even the reflective surface of the glass-fronted bookcase, shattered simultaneously. The sound of breaking glass would have been deafening in the confined space of the parlor. Victorian mirrors were substantially heavier than modern ones, with thicker glass and more substantial backing materials. For all the mirrors to break at once would have required an extraordinary force, perhaps an exceptionally powerful sonic vibration, or a sudden, extreme change in temperature affecting all glass surfaces simultaneously. Contemporary physics offers few explanations for such an occurrence. A localized earthquake could cause vibrations sufficient to shatter glass, but it would affect other objects as well, and no seismic activity was reported in London that day. A powerful electrical discharge might cause glass to break due to rapid heating and expansion, but the gaslighting of the era means there were no substantial electrical sources in the home. Modern parapsychologists might suggest a poltergeist phenomenon, a sudden release of psychokinetic energy, though such explanations remain firmly outside mainstream scientific acceptance. Whatever the cause, the effect was dramatic and immediately dangerous. Catherine Blackwood received a minor cut on her cheek from flying glass, while James suffered a more substantial laceration to his right hand as he moved to shield his wife. Servants rushed in at the sound of breaking glass and screams, finding the family in a state of shock amid the wreckage of the mirrors. In the confusion that followed, no one immediately noticed that Charlotte had disappeared. It was young Margaret who first asked where Miss Charlotte had gone, prompting a search of the house. The maid was nowhere to be found, though her cloak and personal belongings remained in her room. Even more disturbing, Eleanor had collapsed and appeared to be in a catatonic state. Dr. Harrison was again summoned, and finding her unresponsive, recommended she be taken to her bed. Throughout the night, she remained unconscious, occasionally murmuring words that those attending her found impossible to understand. The following morning, Boxing Day, brought horror to the household. Eleanor was found dead in her bed, her eyes open and fixed in an expression of terror. The official cause of death was recorded as heart failure brought on by extreme nervous excitement, a common diagnosis in an era when medical science had limited understanding of psychological trauma's physical effects. Dr. Philip Harrison's medical report, preserved in the archives of the Royal College of Physicians, provides additional details that were omitted from the official death certificate, perhaps to spare the family further distress or scandal. He noted that Eleanor's appearance was consistent with that of a person who experienced extreme terror in their final moments. He documented that her hair, dark blonde the previous day, appeared to have turned completely white overnight, a phenomenon occasionally reported in cases of severe shock but considered medically implausible by modern standards. Most disturbing was his observation that the patient's eyes, naturally blue in color, had darkened to nearly black, with pupils so dilated as to almost eliminate the iris entirely. He also recorded that the room temperature was unusually cold, despite an adequate fire having been maintained throughout the night, and that the mirror in Madame's dressing room, which had reportedly been covered with cloth, was found uncovered and broken, though no one admitted to removing the covering. Charlotte Wells was never found, despite an extensive police investigation. Her disappearance remained unsolved, classified eventually as a missing persons case rather than connected to any foul play, though suspicions lingered. The police investigation into Charlotte's disappearance was led by Inspector Frederick Porter of Scotland Yard, who had gained some renown for his methodical approach to complex cases. His case notes reveal that he initially suspected foul play, possibly at the hands of James Blackwood, who might have blamed the maid for his wife's deteriorating mental state. However, this theory was abandoned after thorough questioning of all household members, and a comprehensive search of the premises revealed no evidence of violence or a body. Porter then pursued the theory that Charlotte had simply fled after witnessing the disturbing events of Christmas night. This seemed more plausible, except for the fact that she had left behind not only her cloak, essential in the bitter December weather, but also her savings of nearly £20, equivalent to several months' wages, and all personal possessions, including letters from her family that servants typically kept as precious reminders of home. Porter's final report concludes with an unusually personal observation. In 15 years of police work, I have never encountered a disappearance so complete and inexplicable. It is as if Miss Wells simply ceased to exist at the precise moment the mirrors shattered in the Blackwood home. In the aftermath of these events, James Blackwood became obsessed with understanding what had happened to his wife and the missing maid. His personal papers show that he consulted various experts in both conventional medicine and more esoteric fields. He collected books on spiritualism, folklore, and the occult. He even traveled to Paris to meet with researchers at the Institut Métaphysique International, which studied paranormal phenomena. What he discovered led him to a startling conclusion, documented in a private journal found hidden in a secret compartment of his desk after his death. According to this journal, James came to believe that the woman who had served as their maid was not Charlotte Wells at all. His investigation revealed that the real Charlotte Wells had died 3 years earlier in 1891. Her references had somehow been obtained and used by the woman who took her place in the Blackwood household. But who was this imposter? And what was her connection to the family? The answer, James believed, lay in his own past. Before his marriage to Eleanor, he had been briefly engaged to another woman, Lillian Gray, the daughter of a business associate. The engagement ended abruptly when Lillian apparently committed suicide by drowning herself in the Thames in the winter of 1876. Her body was recovered days later, and the death was ruled a suicide motivated by melancholia. What was not publicly known, and what James confessed in his private journal, was that Lillian had been with child, his child. When she informed him of her condition, he ended their engagement. Fearing the scandal would ruin his business prospects, he provided her with money and suggested she leave London until the child was born, at which point it could be given to an orphanage. Instead, overcome with despair, she took her own life. James had kept this secret for nearly 20 years, building his fortune and family while suppressing all memory of Lillian Gray. But he came to believe that the woman who called herself Charlotte Wells was actually Lillian's younger sister, Elizabeth Gray, who would have been a child at the time of Lillian's death and would have grown into a young woman by 1894. His journal suggests that Elizabeth had engineered her way into the household under a false identity to exact revenge for her sister's fate. But how could this explain the supernatural occurrences, Eleanor's death, and Elizabeth's disappearance? The Gray family history offers some context for Elizabeth's potential motives. After Lillian's suicide, her father, Edward Gray, lost his position at the investment firm where he worked alongside James Blackwood. The family's financial decline was swift and devastating. Edward died within a year, reportedly of liver failure exacerbated by heavy drinking. His wife, Margaret Gray, was forced to take in sewing work to support herself and young Elizabeth, then just 14 years old. They moved from their comfortable Kensington home to a single room in Whitechapel, one of London's poorest and most dangerous districts. Newspaper accounts from 1881 mention Margaret Gray's death in a tenement fire, after which Elizabeth disappeared from public records until her possible re-emergence as Charlotte Wells in the Blackwood household. These intervening years represent a significant gap in our understanding. Where was Elizabeth during this time? How did she acquire the skills and references necessary to secure a position in an upper-class household? And perhaps most importantly, how did she develop the apparent knowledge of occult practices that James's journal attributes to her? One possible clue comes from police records of the period, which mention an Elizabeth Gray arrested in 1889 for participating in an illegal seance in which clients were defrauded. The charges were eventually dropped, but the arresting officer noted that the young woman demonstrated an uncanny ability to discern details about strangers that by natural means she could not have known. This Elizabeth Gray was described as being in her early 20s with dark hair and unusually pale blue eyes, a description that matches James Blackwood's later recollection of Charlotte Wells. James's final journal entries descend into increasingly fantastical theories. He wrote of sympathetic magic and spiritual possession, concepts he had encountered in his research. He posited that Elizabeth had conducted rituals using mirrors as conduits, creating a connection between the physical world and whatever realm Lillian's spirit inhabited. He believed that on Christmas Day, when the family gathered for the photograph, Elizabeth had completed her plan, allowing Lillian's spirit to cross over and take possession of Eleanor. In this theory, the shattering of the mirrors represented the closing of the doorway after Lillian had passed through, and Elizabeth, having completed her revenge, simply fled. Eleanor's death was the result of her spirit being displaced by Lillian's. The concept of mirrors as portals appears in numerous mythologies and folklore traditions worldwide. In ancient China, mirrors were believed to be gates to the world of spirits and were used in exorcism rituals. European folklore contains many references to mirrors as dangerous objects that could trap souls or serve as entryways for malevolent entities. Even modern urban legends like Bloody Mary revolve around mirrors as conduits to supernatural realms. Victorian spiritualism had developed its own theories about mirrors, influenced by both ancient superstitions and contemporary pseudo-scientific ideas. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in London in 1882, had conducted experiments with mirrors as potential tools for inducing hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. Some spiritualists believed that mirrors, particularly old ones, retained impressions of events they had witnessed and could replay these scenes under certain conditions. More esoteric groups, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, active in London during this period, incorporated mirrors into ritualistic practices designed to facilitate communication with non-physical entities. These rituals often involved prolonged gazing into mirrors under specific lighting conditions, combined with meditation techniques and sometimes mind-altering substances. Whether Elizabeth Gray had connections to such organizations remains speculative, but James Blackwood's journal suggests she possessed knowledge beyond conventional spiritualist practices of the era. He describes finding small mirrors placed strategically throughout the house after Charlotte's disappearance, behind paintings, inside drawers, even embedded in the soil of potted plants. These mirrors were arranged in what he called a precise geometric configuration that, when mapped, formed a pattern centered on the large mirror in the parlor where the family photograph had been taken. Is there any evidence to support such an extraordinary explanation? Perhaps not in terms that modern science would accept, but there are curious details that give one pause. First, there is the photograph itself, with the figure visible in the mirror that no one noticed at the time it was taken. Arthur Sullivan, the photographer, was known for his technical precision. It seems unlikely that such an anomaly would be the result of a double exposure or similar technical error. Sullivan's reputation rested on his meticulous approach to his craft. He kept detailed records of every photograph he took, including exposure times, lighting conditions, and any technical challenges encountered. His equipment was maintained in perfect condition, and he personally mixed his chemical solutions to ensure consistency. Contemporary accounts describe him as obsessively precise and intolerant of even the slightest flaw in his work. This makes the anomaly in the Blackwood photograph all the more puzzling. It represents exactly the kind of imperfection Sullivan would have rejected immediately. Several photographic experts have examined the original print over the years, looking for signs of manipulation. In the 1950s, Kodak's research department conducted a thorough analysis, concluding that the anomalous figure in the mirror appears to have been captured during the original exposure, rather than added later through any known technique of the period. A more recent examination using digital enhancement and spectral analysis, conducted at the University of Cambridge's Department of Photography in 2008, supported this conclusion, finding no evidence of physical or chemical manipulation of the negative or print. Second, there are the curious circumstances of Eleanor's death and Charlotte's disappearance occurring simultaneously. The timing itself is difficult to dismiss as coincidence, but there are additional factors that deepen the mystery. The police report notes that a thorough search of the house, conducted the morning after Eleanor's death, found no possible exit that Charlotte could have used unobserved. All doors were locked from the inside, with keys still in the locks. The windows were similarly secured, and those on upper floors would have required a ladder to access from outside. Yet no ladder was found, and the fresh snow beneath all windows was undisturbed except by investigating officers. Inspector Porter's report specifically mentions that he personally examined all possible hiding places within the house, including attics, cellars, and the spaces behind walls where servants' passages ran. His conclusion was unequivocal. Miss Wells is not on the premises, alive or deceased, yet there appears to be no way she could have left without detection. Third, there is the matter of the Blackwood children's testimony. In statements given to family members in later years, all three reported that in the moments before the mirrors shattered, they saw their mother's reflection move independently of her. Specifically, the reflection smiled, while Eleanor herself was not smiling. And finally, there is the fate of the Blackwood family. After that Christmas of 1894, James never recovered from the shock of losing his wife under such mysterious circumstances. His business suffered as he devoted himself to occult research rather than commerce. He died in 1901, a shadow of his former self, his fortune greatly diminished. The coroner's report for James Blackwood makes for sobering reading. He was found in his study by his housekeeper, seated at his desk with a half-finished letter before him. The letter, addressed to a Dr. Julian Carswell, an obscure occultist in Sussex, broke off mid-sentence. "I believe I have finally understood the mechanism by which the mirrors were used to open the doorway." The alignment of reflective surfaces throughout the house created what might be termed a sympathetic network, through which the official cause of death was listed as apoplexy, but the attending physician noted several unusual aspects of the scene. All mirrors in the study had been covered with black cloth, secured with iron nails driven through the frames. The room was illuminated by candles despite the house having been fitted with electric lighting the previous year. Most curiously, a circle of salt surrounded Blackwood's desk, broken in only one place, as if someone or something had stepped through it. The children were separated and sent to live with various relatives. William eventually joined the British Army and was killed in the Boer War. Catherine married but died in childbirth at the age of 22. Only Margaret lived to old age, though by all accounts she was troubled throughout her life by nightmares and an intense fear of mirrors. She never kept one in her home and would avoid rooms containing them when visiting others. William Blackwood's military records provide a sad postscript to his brief life. After his father's death, he sold his commission in a respectable London regiment and enlisted as a common soldier in the 24th Foot, bound for South Africa. His commanding officer's reports describe him as recklessly brave to the point of seeming to court death, and note that on the night before his fatal encounter with Boer forces near Ladysmith, he was heard to say that, "She appears in every mirror now, beckoning me to join her." Catherine's story is equally tragic. After her father's death, she was taken in by her maternal aunt in Bath. At 19, she married Henry Cavendish, a solicitor 15 years her senior. Their correspondence, preserved by Cavendish's family, reveals Catherine's ongoing struggle with the events of that Christmas night. In one letter, she writes, "I cannot escape the feeling that something watches me from behind my reflection. When I brush my hair at night, I sometimes glimpse another face superimposed over mine. Not quite mother, not quite a stranger, but something in between. Her death in childbirth was complicated by what the attending physician described as extreme agitation and resistance to necessary care. According to the midwife's statement, Catherine became hysterical when a hand mirror was brought near her during labor, insisting that she is trying to take my baby through the glass. Both Catherine and her infant daughter died shortly thereafter. Margaret left behind a memoir, written in the 1950s but never published, in which she reflected on the events of that Christmas. In it, she wrote, "I have never spoken of what I saw in the mirror that day, not to the police, not to father, not to anyone, for what I saw was not some stranger, not the maid, not any external threat. What I saw was mother's face, but with another soul looking out through her eyes. I saw the moment when she ceased to be herself." The Blackwood house still stands in London, though it has been divided into apartments. Residents over the years have reported unusual phenomena: unexplained cold spots, the sound of footsteps when no one is present, and most frequently, glimpses of a woman in Victorian dress seen briefly in mirrors or reflective surfaces. The original photograph that started our investigation resides now in a private collection. The current owner, who wishes to remain anonymous, reports that it is kept in a locked drawer rather than displayed. When asked why, they explained that on the few occasions they had attempted to hang it on a wall, it was always found on the floor the following morning, as if someone, or something, had removed it. Is there a rational explanation for the anomaly in the photograph and the tragic events that followed? Perhaps. The human mind is skilled at finding patterns where none exist, at crafting narratives to explain the inexplicable. The figure in the mirror could be a flaw in the photographic process. Eleanor's death could be the result of an undiagnosed medical condition, and Charlotte's disappearance could be unrelated. A young woman simply deciding to seek opportunities elsewhere without the formality of giving notice. But there is another possibility, one that speaks to our deepest fears about the unknown. What if, sometimes, the barrier between our world and whatever lies beyond becomes thin enough to breach? What if those we have wronged do not always rest peacefully? What if mirrors are not merely reflective surfaces, but windows into somewhere else? The Christmas photograph of the Blackwood family invites these questions, but offers no definitive answers. It remains an unsettling image of a moment frozen in time, a family gathered in celebration, unaware that something watches from behind the glass, something that would tear their lives apart before the day was done. As with many of the cases we explore on Shadow Frames, we are left to draw our own conclusions. But perhaps the next time you catch a glimpse of movement in a mirror when you thought you were alone, or see a reflection that doesn't quite match reality, you might remember the Blackwood family photograph of Christmas 1894. Thank you for joining me for this edition of Shadow Frames. If you enjoyed this exploration of photographic mysteries, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember, not everything captured in a photograph is what it first appears to be. Before we end today's video, I'd like to share one final detail about the Blackwood photograph that I haven't mentioned until now. During my research, I discovered that Arthur Sullivan, the photographer who took the image, died under mysterious circumstances just 3 weeks after delivering the prints to the family. According to newspaper reports of the time, he was found in his darkroom, surrounded by shattered glass from the mirrors used in his photographic process. The official cause of death was listed as misadventure, but a note found among his possessions read simply, "I see her in every reflection now. She is coming for anyone who witnessed her return." Perhaps the true horror of the Blackwood photograph is not just what it captured, but what was unleashed when the shutter closed. Sleep well, and stay away from mirrors at midnight. In the years following the tragic events at the Blackwood household, the story might have faded into obscurity had it not been for a series of similar incidents reported across London. Between 1895 and 1897, 3 other families reported experiences reminiscent of the Blackwoods: unexplained reflections in mirrors, sudden deaths, and disappearances. In each case, investigation revealed a connection, however tenuous, to Lillian Gray or her family. The first occurred in April 1895, just 4 months after Eleanor Blackwood's death. Thomas Mercer, a solicitor who had handled some legal matters for James Blackwood's shipping company, reported to police that his wife was being haunted by a woman in their bedroom mirror. Before the authorities could investigate, Mrs. Mercer was found dead, her face frozen in an expression witnesses described as pure terror. Records would later show that Thomas Mercer had been the lawyer who processed the paperwork, declaring Lillian Gray's death a suicide, potentially saving James Blackwood from scandal. The second incident took place in November 1896. Frederick Wilson, a former business partner of James Blackwood, sought help from a priest, claiming that his daughter was possessed by an entity that came through her dressing table mirror. The priest attempted an exorcism, which by his own written account resulted in a violent manifestation that caused every reflective surface in the house to shatter simultaneously. Wilson's daughter survived but spent the remainder of her life in an asylum, supposedly speaking occasionally in a voice not her own and referring to herself as Lillian. Wilson, it was discovered, had been aware of James's treatment of Lillian Gray and had counseled him to end the relationship rather than risk his reputation. The third and perhaps most disturbing case occurred in February 1897. Dr. Richard Harrison, the same physician who had attended Eleanor Blackwood, was found dead in his home, his body discovered by his housekeeper. According to her testimony, the doctor had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before his death, covering all mirrors and even reflective surfaces like windows at night. He had told colleagues he was being pursued by a former patient. His journal, found after his death, contained entries about Eleanor Blackwood and expressed guilt that he had dismissed her fears as hysteria rather than investigating the true cause of her distress. These incidents led to whispers of a mirror curse, or the Blackwood haunting, in certain circles of London society. Some claimed it was divine retribution for James Blackwood's treatment of Lillian Gray, while others suggested more esoteric explanations involving spiritual possession and sympathetic magic. The spiritualist community of Victorian London took particular interest in these events. Seances were held attempting to contact Eleanor Blackwood and Lillian Gray, though accounts vary as to their success. One medium, Emmeline Foster, gained brief notoriety by claiming to have made contact with both women during a public seance in 1898. According to newspaper reports, she fell into a trance and spoke in two distinct voices, one begging for help, the other coldly triumphant. The seance ended abruptly when all the candles in the room extinguished simultaneously and a decorative mirror fell from the wall, narrowly missing Foster's head. Interest in the case might have continued had it not been overshadowed by the death of Queen Victoria in 1901 and the social changes that followed as the Victorian era gave way to the Edwardian. The story of the Blackwood family and their Christmas photograph became just another half-forgotten tale in London's rich tapestry of ghost stories and unexplained phenomena. But the photograph itself continued its journey through the decades, passing from owner to owner, many of whom reported strange experiences while in possession of it. In 1923, it was acquired by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, who had developed a deep interest in spiritualism following the deaths of his son and brother in World War I. Doyle kept the photograph as part of his collection of supposedly supernatural artifacts and mentioned it briefly in his writings on spiritualism. The Blackwood photograph, he wrote, presents us with compelling evidence that the camera may capture what the human eye cannot, namely, the presence of those who have passed beyond the veil, but who, for reasons of their own, have not completed their journey to the other side. After Doyle's death in 1930, the photograph was sold at auction along with other items from his estate. Its whereabouts remained unknown until 1967, when it appeared in the collection of a private museum of the paranormal in New Orleans. The curator, Edward Lefebvre, claimed that on 3 separate occasions, the photograph was found turned to face the wall when the museum opened in the morning, despite having been properly hung the night before. In 1974, a fire destroyed much of the museum's collection, but the Blackwood photograph survived, showing not even the slightest sign of smoke damage. This further enhanced its reputation among collectors of paranormal artifacts. The photograph changed hands several more times over the next few decades, eventually coming into the possession of the anonymous collector who owns it today. This collector, whom I've had the privilege of interviewing for this video, described their first encounter with the image. I didn't believe the stories, of course. I'm a collector of Victorian photography, particularly family portraits and holiday scenes. The Blackwood photograph was interesting to me purely from a historical perspective, a well-preserved example of Christmas photography from the period. But the first night after I brought it home, I dreamed of a woman standing at the foot of my bed, her face half hidden in shadow. She asked me if I knew what it was like to drown, to feel the water filling your lungs while knowing the man you loved had abandoned you. I woke gasping for breath, my bedsheets soaked as if I'd been pulled from the Thames myself. The next night, I locked the photograph in my safe. I slept peacefully. The pattern has held ever since. If the photograph is visible in my home, the dreams come. If it's secured away, I rest undisturbed. It's worth noting that modern analysis of the Blackwood photograph has revealed no evidence of tampering or double exposure that might explain the figure visible in the mirror. Digital enhancement has made the figure clearer but no more identifiable. A woman in dark clothing, her face turned slightly away from the mirror's reflection. Some skeptics suggest that the figure could simply be a household servant who happened to walk behind the family during the exposure, though this doesn't explain why she would be visible only in the mirror and not in the room itself. Others propose more elaborate hoaxes involving manipulated negatives or prints, though the photograph has been authenticated as a genuine artifact of its period by several experts in historical photography. The story of the Blackwood family Christmas takes on additional layers of intrigue when we consider the cultural context of the Victorian era. This was a society deeply fascinated by death and the possibility of communication with the deceased. The 1890s saw spiritualism at its peak of popularity, with seances being conducted in drawing rooms across Britain and America. Photography itself was still a relatively new technology, and spirit photography, in which ghostly figures supposedly appeared in portraits, was both widely practiced and hotly debated. In this environment, the idea that a spirit might use a mirror as a gateway between worlds would not have seemed as far-fetched to the Victorians as it might to us today. Mirrors have long held a special place in folklore and superstition across cultures. The Victorians, in particular, had numerous beliefs and practices surrounding mirrors, including covering them in a house where a death had occurred to prevent the deceased's soul from becoming trapped, or to stop the spirit from pulling the living into the mirror world. Such beliefs may explain why James Blackwood, despite his initial skepticism, eventually came to accept supernatural explanations for what happened to his family. In a society where the veil between life and death was considered permeable, his conclusions wouldn't have seemed as outlandish as they might in our more materialistic age. But what of Elizabeth Grey, the woman who called herself Charlotte Wells? If James's theory was correct and she had infiltrated the household to avenge her sister, what became of her after that Christmas night? Police records from the period show that a woman matching Elizabeth Grey's description took passage on a ship bound for America in January 1895, just weeks after the incidents at the Blackwood house. The passenger manifest lists her as Elizabeth Wells, suggesting she maintained at least part of her false identity. Beyond this, the historical record falls silent. Whether she found peace after completing her revenge or carried the burden of what she had done into her new life, we can only speculate. There is, however, one final piece to this puzzle that emerged during my research. In 1932, a woman named Elizabeth Blackwood died in Boston, Massachusetts. Her death certificate listed her age as 62, which would place her birth around 1870, making her the right age to be Elizabeth Grey. More intriguing still, she left behind a journal, currently held in the archives of a small historical society in New England. The journal contains no explicit confession or reference to the events in London, but it does include a passage written on Christmas Day, 1931, nearly 4 decades after the Blackwood tragedy. Another Christmas comes, and with it, the memories that never fade. I did what needed to be done. The mirrors served their purpose, the doorway opened, and she found her way through. Some might call it justice, others vengeance. I call it balance restored. The debt is paid in full now, his family for hers, his happiness for her despair. Yet still I keep no mirrors in my home. I have seen what can come through them, and once such a doorway is opened, it can never be truly closed again. Was Elizabeth Blackwood once Elizabeth Grey? Did she take the name of the family she destroyed as a final act of appropriation, or perhaps as a reminder of what she had done? The journal offers tantalizing hints but no definitive answers. The story of the Blackwood family Christmas photograph remains, at its core, a mystery wrapped in the limitations of history and the unreliability of human testimony. We can piece together what happened from letters, diaries, and official records, but the truth may lie somewhere in the spaces between these documents, in moments never recorded, in conversations never transcribed, in experiences too strange to be committed to paper. What we know with certainty is that a family gathered around a Christmas tree in 1894, smiling for a photograph that would preserve that moment for posterity. We know that within hours of that image being captured, something terrible occurred. We know that lives were shattered as surely as the mirrors in that Victorian parlor, and we know that in the photograph itself, Something appears that should not be there. A figure in the mirror, watching the family from behind, visible only in reflection, as if occupying a space adjacent to reality but not quite part of it. The rational mind searches for explanations. A flaw in the photographic process, a servant accidentally captured, an elaborate hoax, yet none fully satisfy. The irrational mind leaps to more disturbing possibilities. A spirit seeking vengeance, a tear in the fabric separating worlds, a moment when the past reached through to claim its due. Perhaps the enduring fascination of the Blackwood photograph lies in this tension, between what we can explain and what we cannot, between the world as we understand it and the possibility that our understanding is incomplete. It reminds us that beneath the surface of even the most joyful occasions, currents of the past continue to flow, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, those currents break through. As I conclude this edition of Shadow Frames, I invite you to look closely at the mirrors in your own home. What do they reflect? What might they conceal? And what might be looking back at you from the other side of the glass? For those interested in examining the Blackwood photograph themselves, I must offer a word of caution. The current owner has permitted me to show the image in this video, but they insist that viewers be warned. Prolonged study of the photograph, especially at night or in a room with mirrors, has been associated with unsettling experiences, vivid dreams of drowning, the sensation of being watched, and in a few cases, glimpses of a woman in Victorian dress reflected in mirrors when no one is present. Is this the power of suggestion at work? Our minds conjuring phantoms after hearing a chilling tale? Or is there something about the photograph itself that retains an echo of whatever occurred in that London parlor on Christmas Day, 1894? I leave you to draw your own conclusions. But perhaps, just to be safe, consider watching the remainder of this video with your back to any mirrors in the room. Next week on Shadow Frames, we'll examine another photographic mystery, the case of the Willoughby wedding party, where every member of a bridal procession was found dead within 1 year of the photograph being taken, each in circumstances that eerily mirrored aspects of the wedding ritual itself. Until then, remember that photographs do not merely capture light and shadow, they capture moments in time, preserving them long after the subjects have turned to dust. And sometimes, just sometimes, they capture things never meant to be seen by human eyes. What I haven't shared until now is that during my investigation, I managed to locate Margaret Blackwood's personal effects, preserved by a distant relative. Among her possessions was a small journal she kept as a child, beginning just before that fateful Christmas and continuing for several months afterward. The entries provide a child's perspective on the events that unfolded, simple, direct, and perhaps more chilling for their innocence. Her entry from December 23, 1894 reads, "Miss Charlotte helped me wrap Father's Christmas gift today. She told me stories about her sister who died. She said sometimes people who leave us too soon find ways to come back if someone they love helps them. I asked if her sister might come visit us for Christmas. She smiled in a strange way and said her sister already visits her every night in the mirror." The entry from Christmas Eve, "Mother seems afraid today. She wouldn't look in any mirrors while getting ready for the party. I heard her arguing with Father about removing the covers from the mirrors for the guests. Miss Charlotte brought me hot chocolate and said tomorrow would be a special day that everyone would remember." And most disturbing, her entry from December 25th, the day of the photograph, "The man took our picture by the tree this afternoon. Miss Charlotte stood behind Mother, helping her stay calm. After the photographer left, Miss Charlotte showed me a game with the mirror. She stood me in front of it and said, if I looked hard enough, I might see two of myself. I didn't understand until later when the lights went out. When they came back, I saw Mother standing by the mirror, but her reflection wasn't doing the same thing she was. The reflection was smiling when Mother wasn't. Then all the mirrors broke at once. Miss Charlotte vanished. Mother fell down. Now Father says Mother has gone to heaven, but I don't think that's where she went. I think she went into the mirror and someone else came out." These simple observations from a child who couldn't fully comprehend what she was witnessing add another layer to our understanding of that day. Margaret's journal stops abruptly in February 1895, resuming years later with no mention of mirrors, her mother, or Charlotte ever again. Another document I discovered during my research was a letter from Arthur Sullivan, the photographer, to a colleague dated December 26, 1894, the day after he took the Blackwood family photograph and the day Eleanor was found dead. In it, he writes, "The strangest thing occurred when developing the Blackwood Christmas portrait yesterday. As the image emerged in the chemical bath, I observed what appeared to be an additional figure reflected in the mirror behind the family, a woman I do not recall being present during the sitting. More disturbing still, as I was fixing the print, I could swear the figure in the mirror moved, just slightly, turning her head toward me as if aware she was being observed. I dismissed it as a trick of the light in my tired eyes, but last night I dreamed of this woman. She stood at the foot of my bed, dripping with river water, asking if I would help her find justice. I awoke to find my bedroom mirror had fallen from the wall, though the nail remained firmly in place. I deliver the prints to the Blackwood residence tomorrow, after which I intend to destroy the negative. Some images were not meant to be preserved. Sullivan never delivered those prints. He was found dead in his darkroom 3 weeks later, as I mentioned earlier in our story. The prints and negative were discovered in a sealed envelope addressed to James Blackwood, but never sent. How they eventually reached the family remains unknown. The story of the Blackwood photograph took another turn in 1973 when a series of paranormal researchers from Cambridge University conducted experiments with the image. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a parapsychologist, placed the photograph in a sealed room monitored by various instruments designed to detect temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic fields, and other phenomena often associated with paranormal activity. The results, published in the now-defunct Journal of Paranormal Research, described significant and repeatable anomalies when the photograph was placed near a mirror. According to Dr. Montgomery's notes, when the Blackwood photograph is positioned so that it is reflected in a mirror, our instruments detect a temperature drop of approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit in the immediate vicinity. This effect occurs regardless of the room's starting temperature and returns to normal when either the photograph is removed or the mirror is covered. More intriguing still, audio recording equipment placed in the room captured what appears to be a woman's voice, too faint for human ears but detectable when the recordings are amplified. Spectral analysis suggests the voice is repeating the same phrase, "Let me through." The Cambridge experiments were discontinued after 2 research assistants resigned, claiming to have seen a woman's face superimposed over their own when looking in mirrors after working with the photograph. Dr. Montgomery herself suffered a nervous breakdown the following year and never returned to academic research. In the decades that followed, the Blackwood photograph passed through the hands of various collectors and institutions, each reporting unusual phenomena associated with it. The New Orleans museum that housed it in the 1960s claimed that visitors would occasionally see their reflections in nearby glass cases, transformed briefly into the image of a Victorian woman. A private collector in the 1980s reported that his dogs would howl when brought into the room where the photograph hung and would refuse to enter thereafter. In 2010, a digital copy of the photograph was created for preservation purposes. The technician performing the work later stated that the digital file would inexplicably corrupt whenever opened, showing different details in the mirror's reflection with each viewing. Eventually, all digital copies became completely unusable, leaving only the original print as evidence of what was captured that Christmas Day. The current whereabouts of the original Blackwood photograph are known only to a select few. The anonymous collector who shared it with me for this video keeps it in a climate-controlled vault, removed from any reflective surfaces. They permit it to be viewed only under strict conditions and never after sunset. As for the Blackwood house itself, it remained divided into apartments throughout much of the 20th century, with residents frequently reporting unusual phenomena. In 1987, a complete renovation was undertaken, during which all original mirrors were removed and replaced. The construction crew made an unusual discovery behind the wall where the parlor mirror had hung. A small cloth doll, similar to the one young Margaret Blackwood holds in the Christmas photograph, wrapped in a piece of paper. On the paper was written in a childish hand, "She is still here. She watches from all the mirrors now." The house was converted into luxury condominiums in 2015. The developer, unaware of its history, installed floor-to-ceiling mirrors in each unit as a selling feature, advertising them as creating a sense of expanded space and light. Within 6 months, 3 residents had broken their leases, citing unexplainable disturbances. One resident, a graduate student in psychology, left a detailed account of waking each night at 3:17 a.m. to find what appeared to be a Victorian-era woman standing in the bedroom mirror, her face contorted in a silent scream. In a final, perhaps ironic twist, the parlor where the Blackwood family gathered for their Christmas photograph in 1894 is now a professional photography studio specializing in family portraits. The current owner claims to be unaware of the building's history, though they did mention to me that they've had unusual technical difficulties with equipment when photographing clients near the north wall, where the original mirror once hung. What are we to make of all this? Is the Blackwood photograph merely an unusual image around which an elaborate mythology has formed? Or is it evidence of something beyond our understanding? A moment when the barrier between worlds was breached, leaving a lasting tear that continues to affect those who come into contact with it. Perhaps we will never know for certain, but I find myself returning to the words in Margaret Blackwood's childhood journal, written with a simplicity that cuts through all the speculation and theory. I think she went into the mirror, and someone else came out. In a world of endless digital images, where photographs are taken, shared, and forgotten in moments, the Blackwood Christmas portrait stands as a reminder of a time when capturing an image was a rare and almost magical act. It reminds us that some moments once preserved may continue to echo through time in ways we cannot fully comprehend. One last note before we part ways. Since beginning my research into the Blackwood photograph, I've noticed something peculiar in my own home. A mirror that has hung in my hallway for years now seems different somehow. The reflection appears slightly delayed, as if the image takes a fraction of a second to form after I pass by. And twice now, I've caught a glimpse of someone standing behind my reflection, a woman in dark clothing, her face turned away. Just my imagination, surely. The power of suggestion after weeks immersed in this story. Nothing more. Yet I find myself avoiding that hallway after dark. And yesterday, I ordered a cloth to cover the mirror at night. Just a precaution, of course. Nothing more than that. Good night, and sweet dreams. And perhaps, if you found this story particularly affecting, you might consider taking a closer look at the mirrors in your own home. Not now, of course, but later tonight, when the house is quiet and the only light comes from the screen you're watching. Who knows what might be looking back? As interest in our channel has grown, viewers have sent in numerous accounts of their own strange experiences with mirrors, many claiming to have occurred after watching our videos about the Blackwood photograph. While most can be attributed to the power of suggestion, our minds are remarkably adept at finding patterns and creating narratives from random stimuli. A few reports stand out for their specificity and consistency. 3 viewers, with no apparent connection to each other and living in different countries, reported dreaming of a woman in Victorian dress who asked them about drowning. 2 others claimed to have found their mirrors turned to face the wall upon waking, despite living alone. And one particularly disturbing account came from a university student in Edinburgh who, after watching our video late at night, took a photograph of herself in her bathroom mirror, only to discover what appeared to be a woman in dark clothing standing behind her when she reviewed the image, though she had been alone in the apartment. Are these merely elaborate hoaxes, people seeking attention by contributing to a compelling narrative? Possibly. The internet has certainly made it easier to fabricate and share such stories, but the volume and consistency of these reports give one pause. Perhaps there is something about the Blackwood story that resonates with a deeper truth or fear within us all. Mirrors have featured prominently in human folklore and superstition across cultures and throughout history. The Romans believed that mirrors captured pieces of the soul, which is why they would cover mirrors when someone died, and why breaking a mirror was considered 7 years of misfortune, the time it supposedly took for the soul to regenerate. In Chinese tradition, mirrors were thought to reveal a person's true nature and could be used to repel evil spirits. Many cultures share beliefs that mirrors are gateways or portals between worlds. Even in our modern, scientifically enlightened age, mirrors retain their power to unsettle us. Consider the common childhood game of saying Bloody Mary 3 times while looking into a darkened mirror, daring something frightening to appear. Or the way many people avoid looking into mirrors in the dark, uncomfortable with what they might see in that reflective surface when visibility is compromised. Perhaps there is something fundamental in human psychology that recognizes mirrors as uncanny objects, familiar yet strange, offering a view of reality that is both accurate and fundamentally wrong, with left and right reversed. They show us ourselves as others see us, a perspective we can never naturally possess. The Blackwood photograph taps into this ancient unease about reflective surfaces. It suggests that what we see in mirrors may not always be a simple reflection of physical reality, that sometimes something else might be looking back. In researching this story, I've consulted with experts in various fields, Historians specializing in Victorian England, photography experts familiar with the techniques and limitations of 1890s camera technology, paranormal investigators who approach such cases with a blend of skepticism and open-mindedness, and psychologists who study how the mind processes visual information and creates meaning from ambiguous stimuli. Dr. Eleanor Hawkins, a cultural historian at Cambridge University, offered this perspective. The Blackwood case sits at an interesting intersection of Victorian anxieties, fears about technology, particularly new visual technologies like photography, concerns about the permeability of boundaries between life and death, which manifested in the spiritualist movement, and the ever-present undercurrent of class anxiety, with servants potentially harboring secret identities and motives. Whether supernatural or not, the story perfectly encapsulates the fears of its era. Photography expert Martin Sherwood examined high-resolution scans of the photograph and noted, "There are no obvious signs of manipulation consistent with Victorian photographic techniques. If this is a hoax, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one for its time. The figure in the mirror presents a genuine anomaly from a technical perspective." Dr. Rebecca Stern, a clinical psychologist specializing in perception and memory, offered a more skeptical view. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We evolved to find meaning and connection even in random stimuli. It's why we see faces in clouds or hear voices in white noise. The figure in the mirror could easily be a combination of shadows and reflections that our minds interpret as human, because that's what our brains are wired to recognize. And finally, paranormal investigator Thomas Blackwell, no relation to the family in our story, provided this thought. "I've investigated hundreds of allegedly haunted locations and reviewed thousands of ghost photographs. Most have simple explanations, but occasionally we encounter cases that resist all conventional explanation. The Blackwood photograph and the events surrounding it constitute one of those rare cases where, even applying the most rigorous skepticism, something truly inexplicable seems to have occurred." As for my own perspective, after months spent researching this story, examining the photograph, and reading first-hand accounts from those who experienced that Christmas day in 1894, I find myself in an uncomfortable middle ground. The rational part of my mind seeks explanations in photographic anomalies, family secrets, and the power of suggestion. Yet I cannot entirely dismiss the possibility that something truly extraordinary happened in that Victorian parlor, that for a brief moment the barrier between worlds thinned and something came through. Perhaps that is why the Blackwood photograph continues to fascinate us more than a century after it was taken. It stands as a testament to the mysteries that persist even in our age of scientific enlightenment, a reminder that there may be more to our reality than what we can measure and quantify. Whether you view this story as a chilling tale of supernatural vengeance or a tragic case of coincidence and psychological distress colored by the superstitions of its time, I hope it has given you cause to consider the nature of reflection, both literal, in our mirrors, and figurative, in how we process the events of our lives. For those interested in exploring this case further, I've compiled a bibliography of sources in the description below. However, I must repeat the warning. Some who have delved too deeply into the Blackwood story report unsettling experiences afterward. Research at your own risk. And with that final caution, I truly must bid you farewell until our next exploration of photographic mysteries. This has been Shadow Frames. Sleep well, and perhaps, just perhaps, consider covering your mirrors tonight.